Couldn't make it to Photonics West?
We've got the scoop for you from San Francisco this week on Light Matters. This is Light Matters for February 18th, 2015. I'm Justine Murphy.
And I'm James Lowe. This is the first time for both Justine and I here at SPIE's Photonics West, and I think it's been a really eye-opening event for both of us just to see the volume and the breadth of the research that's going on and the companies that are working in the industry. This year, the number of people who registered for Photonics West was 21,787, a little over 400 more than the 2014 number. And meanwhile, 8,500 people visited the exhibition. So there have been a lot of industry milestones in the last couple of months, and those are being reflected here very much. Of course, it's the International Year of Light, and there are a lot of tie-ins with that. Also, just last month, the father of the laser, Charles Hart Towns, passed away, and he's been remembered here. At the Lays plenary the other day, SPIE's CEO, Eugene Arthurs, was remembering Towns as someone who really loved working with students and someone who was very vivacious. We know that he, until just a few months before his death, was continuing to work in his lab at UC Berkeley, and Arthurs talked about how at a conference a few years ago, he was the first one on and the last one off the dance floor. So that was a funny story. And of course also the other big photonics industry momentous news in the last few months has been the awarding of the Nobel Prizes in chemistry and physics for the invention of blue LEDs and super resolution microscopy. And at the BIOS plenary, some of those Nobel laureates spoke. Dr. Eric Betzig talked about collaborating with his longtime friend, Dr. Harold Hess. They both spent a lot of time working on what they thought were failed microscopy techniques before quitting Bell Labs in frustration.
Shortly after I quit, within months, as I was pushing my daughter around in a stroller, I realized that you could combine the single molecule detection and localization experiment that I did with the quantum well experiment Harold and I did to make a completely different way of beating the diffraction limit. So the idea was that, well, your sample is made of molecules, and if these molecules are fluorescent or glowing, the problem is that they're fuzzy balls, diffraction-limited balls, run together to create a mess. But if somehow all of those molecules are different from one another optically, that they either glow in different colors, have different polarizations, turn on at different times, then I can isolate them in a higher dimensional space. But once they're isolated, then I can actually find the centers of each of those fuzzy balls much better than the diameter of the fuzzy ball, and hence find the positions of all the molecules. So I published that idea in '95. I almost didn't publish it because I was unemployed, and I was like, well, what the hell? I don't know. I don't care anymore. But if I didn't publish that paper, I wouldn't be up here today, because the committee recognized this paper.
I did have time to see the Women in Optics panel discussion on Monday. They basically just focused a lot on breaking gender stereotypes, different challenges that they've had to face as women in a predominantly male industry. So as a female member of the news media, I've also had that kind of experience as far as having to maybe prove myself a little more just because it's so historically been dominated by male. The panelists really encouraged, especially the young researchers that were in the audience, to not be afraid to take risks and, break through whatever ceilings are above and that kind of thing. And not to be afraid to throw themselves into their work and, work based on their passion for it, as opposed to, trying to prove themselves or something like that, as far as breaking these stereotypes.
So meanwhile, I've been going to a lot of demonstrations and talks around the conference. One of them was we've talked about it on Light Matters in the past. It's called the Rochester Cloak. It's developed by Joseph Choi at the University of Rochester, and it uses a series of lenses to hide objects that are situated between those lenses. So we have some video of that.
So for geometric optics, if you're familiar with geometric optics, we use a paraxial formalism, so it's the first order within about 30 degrees it works. If you describe a perfect cloak, you describe it again as empty space of length L. So if this is your cloaking device and it has length L, you just want this to be empty space of the same length. And That's very simple, actually. If you've taken geometric optics, everyone knows what the ABCD matrix for free space of length L is. It's just transferring, it's called a translation matrix or a transfer matrix. You're just basically sending light through over a distance L. Very simple, right? But this actually gives you enough math to start to build a cloak. Very simple.
Troy said that he will leave it up to the entrepreneurs to figure out how this cloaking device will actually be useful, but one of the things he said might work is actually hiding satellites in orbit. I'll highlight two of the talks that I went to as well. One was by Dr. Gabriel Popescu of the University of Illinois, who was talking about qualitative phase imaging, and this is a way that you can study cells without fluorescent labels. So he thinks this has real promise for studying cell development, especially neuron development over really long periods of time, up to a week. The other one was by Donald Cornwell of NASA. He talked about using optical transmission lasers to get much higher bandwidth for transmitting data through space. Just in 2013, NASA did a kind of proof of concept run with a probe that went to the moon, and Cornwell was talking about how if we wanted to generate kind of a Google Earth style map of Mars, it would take 9 years to send all that data back using the radio frequencies that are used today. So we need a lot more bandwidth in order to get the richness of detail that we want, and that's the direction that they're working in.
We should also mention the PRISM Awards that are co-sponsored by Photonics Media as well as SPIE. They honored the best of the best in the industry in 9 different categories, was it? It just was a really fun night, a lot of ideas being passed around, a lot of just meeting people, and we'll go more in depth on the PRISM Awards next week on Light Matters.
I also want to mention that next week we have 2 webinars coming up. We have on the 25th speakers from Perceptron and Neptech. They're going to be talking about laser-based machine vision. And on the 26th, we're going to have Dr. Federico Capasso from Harvard talking about flat optics based on metasurfaces. So sign up for those at photonics.com/webinars. And reporting from Photonics West in San Francisco, I'm James Lowe.
And I'm Justine Murphy. We'll see you next week.